So, late last year, Pokemon Legends ZA released, and to be frank, the discussion of the game was...
This whole city is one 3D model that's rendered in at all times.
Franchise that I grew up with turned into a social media war zone. Every single time somebody tries to criticize the game, a half a dozen self-appointed defenders come out swinging, calling it grifting, misinformation, or some coordinated smear campaign against the Pokemon Company. It's just so stupid.
Look, a lot of the game's discussion where I stood was messy to say the least, but I think one thing that needs to actually be talked about is the world we dropped into when we press start. Welcome to Lumiose City. Unlike a lot of people, I don't think the idea of Lumiose City being a major hub is a bad idea inherently. The problem to me was the execution. And no, I'm not just talking about the windows. There's nothing wrong with a game having set in a single city. There are a number of games that are set in that and can make the world feel alive as well. To me though, while I don't think Lumiose is a completely dead location, there are a lot of things that can be done in order to make it be better. And that's what this video is about today. Slight warning for spoilers in the game because we'll be talking about characters that show up. One of the main aspects of Legend ZA's plot is that wild Pokemon are slowly creeping into the city streets, taking over portions of the city and not only making it a bit more dangerous since wild Pokemon will attack people, but in some parts will even change the environment, at least in one area. There's a bit of an unrest in the city with this happening, and understandably so. Cities are meant to be lived in, and are supposed to be a representation of order to some degree. Well, at least not until you get stabbed in the back with a knife. So when you introduce an element like creatures that can spit out fire or shoot electricity out of their cheeks, and these things are taking over the streets, that's going to cause some problems. However, the issue with Lumiose is that there's a bit of sanitization going on. A lot of the time, the only thing that can really change about the streets that get turned into wild zones is that they're mostly just replacing the models that are in there. Before the wild zones are established, they're just regular locations in Lumiose City with NPCs in them, with the exception of Wild Zone 12. It's a park-like location that has a small water canal that people can walk down to initially, but after it gets turned into a wild area where a ton of ice types decide to take residence into, it gets covered in snow. There are small glaciers in the water and ice appears all over the place. There are even some fighting types that have apparently lifted up the rocks that blocked a battle arena for them to claim. And I think this is what the Wild Zone should have been like. Seeing the Pokemon that are having a more dramatic effect on the city. Let's go through a few of the zones and see how we can change these to reflect that. First, I want to say I think the first two wild zones shouldn't really be changed. They're pretty much the same as the first route or two in your regular Pokemon games, and I feel something like that should be reflective in the city, making people believe, oh, it's just two locations and the Pokemon aren't really all that dangerous there. It's when we start getting to more areas that we see there being an escalation. Wild Zone 4, it's set in a cemetery, and as you can imagine, there are ghost types, bug types, and poison types. Now, ghosts in a cemetery? That sounds great! It makes sense, and adds to the spooky atmosphere. But what I would do is add a few other things. Let's add some stuff like spider webs and some broken tombstones. Not only will that showcase that Pokemon are now slowly changing the environment of the city, but it can be brushed away by this is stuff normal for a creepy cemetery. It does a good representation of spooky elements, all the while having a more natural look. You see, the thing is with these wild zones, I slowly want them to ramp up and reflect the elemental basis for the Pokemon that live in them. You'll notice that there are some random assortment of Pokemon here, which I think is a bit of an issue. So you'd have to change up some of the roster of Pokemon within each zone to follow this idea that I have. But let's look at Wild Zone 8. It's a circular park that has two large dirt sections to it, with grass rounds within it too. Most of the Pokemon here are ground types, so to some degree this makes sense. You'll see Sandile and Krokorok digging around in the dirt, and you'll see molehills that have Drillbur and Gibble in them. I think what should have been done is that because of these Pokemon digging and moving around the dirt, the entire zone should have had more sandy texture. Like, because of all the uprooting and such, they've managed to make most of the zone into a pseudo-desert, with some patches of bushes and berries that can eat from in it. Wild Zone 15 has a lot of bug and ghost types, again, but is set in a street that has a few trees. So much like Wild Zone 4, we should add some webbing and have the streets change to a different color going on, almost like there was a spooky presence corrupting the location. This isn't a cemetery, it's a regular street, so there should be some changes here. There are probably countless ways to change the Wild Zones, and these are only some of the suggestions, but as I stated before, the logic should be that we up the transformation of the city with each zone that we unlocked. Because now you'll have more people seeing that Pokemon are an issue by completely revamping the streets and homes. So you not only have a thematic element being in line with the original game's story, but you can see why more and more people are having issues with this since the Pokemon are outright changing the city. There are two things I want to focus on with the streets of Lumiose, and that's to do with the districts and the NPCs. The districts are probably a smaller issue and faster to fix, so let's start with that. Lumiose is split up into 5 districts. the Vert District, the Blue District, the Magenta District, the Rouge District, and the Jaune District, all connected to Centrico Plaza. Now, if you got ears or are actually watching the video and not just using this background noise while you're drawing, and yes, I am in your walls, you'll notice that each of these districts not only have a color associated with them, but they have a distinct manhole cover that shows the specific Pokemon affiliated with them. A very simple design change is to actually have the districts have the buildings and streets have the coloring that they're associated with. Make the rooftops a certain color, have statues and fountains that are related to the Pokemon on the manhole covers, stuff like that. The Blue District has Greninja on its manhole cover, so maybe have statues or fountains of Frogadier or Froakie around the locations. Something to give each district their own identity and make each of them feel unique from each other so the streets aren't blending into each other, and can tell the player where they are without having the need of the game to have that little announcement at the top of the screen. A player should be able to recognize the location, especially if the map is so small, and can also allow players to have areas be a lot more recognizable. And it's not like there aren't areas that have these elements to them. If you go to the Fist of Justice Dojo, you can find training logs that look like Trevenant, and on top of poles, they have little Punkabool molds that have lights in them. Considering these are both ghost types, it's really fun to consider that Gwyn is the one who suggested this sort of decor, especially considering that the Fist of Justice typically use fighting-type Pokemon. Now for the NPCs, or the side characters in the game. After playing the main game in DLC, I can say the characters are probably the best part of the game. They're fun, they're quirky, and they honestly have the most personality for characters in a Pokemon game in a long time. And I think you can really utilize them to help make the city feel a lot more alive. What do I mean by this? Well, for that, let's go back to the past. Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. I want to preface this part with that I have a lot of issues with the second generation, not only from an artistic point of view, but from a game design perspective. And if you want to see a video on that in this style, let me know. Heck, if you enjoy the content so far, leave a like, comment if you want to see more, and if you're on mobile, consider using the hype feature to help push the video into the algorithm. Back on topic, the thing with the Gen 2 games, they had a bit of a calendar system. What I mean by that is there would be certain events that would take place depending on the time and day. Two of the most common ones are the Bug Contest, and the Lapras that appears on Caves and Friday Night. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, I earlier brought up the characters, and I thought something that would be fun to do was to have the characters in the game have pre-programmed events happening. Nothing too elaborate, mind you, but something like having the NPCs show up to different locations in the town would make the world feel alive. Perhaps early in the morning, you can see Ivor running laps around the city with a few members of his team following him, just doing some easy exercising. Maybe you could see Lita dancing around at different locations in the city, practicing in front of crowds. In the DLC, we have Tarragon getting cooking lessons from Grisham, going so far as to get some ingredients from the local markets. Why not have them doing that on early mornings to go to the shops, just seeing the two walk around? Maybe at night during the ZA Royale, you can actually see the trainers battling against nameless NPCs in the background. After all, during the story, they too need to earn points for their challenge tickets. Not really fair that only you have to do that. This doesn't have to be a big event either. Just show them in the background fighting each other. And you can even do this with the NPCs too. Like, sure, some of the NPCs in the game do move around, and sometimes you'll see some rando taking a walk with a Pokemon, but there should be more people walking around. It's a city. If you look towards games like the Yakuza series, you'll get plenty of NPCs walking around, and sure, there's a little jank here and there. But at least makes the cities in those games feel alive and not so static. You should see NPCs and characters doing things other than just being stuck in single locations like they were statues. I know what you're thinking. Reusing assets, but isn't that lazy? And to that I'll say, no! Tons of games reuse assets. Hell, I know I keep referencing the Yakuza games, but they really do this well, especially when you consider stuff like animations. Or the fact that a lot of the games have Kamurocho as a setting. You'd be surprised how effective this is, and most gamers don't even realize this. The only reason why it's a thing in Pokemon is because, well, they tend to do the laziest things to do this. Though looking at the leaks, it looks like there were some issues going on. I brought up how the buildings could be different colors, and that could probably be enough to make people satisfied, but let's give a few examples on how we can make this work better. At one point in the game's main story, we're tasked to team up with Ivor and another character, Emma. Yes, that's the same character everyone's been taking a pic of her butt of. Ass! And we need to find Ivor's younger sister, Gwen. We find her in the sewers. In a generic sewer location. That's sad. But here's where we can change this up to add not only personality to the area, but also have elements of Gwen's personality too. See, she's a huge fan of Kanari, a streaming Pokemon trainer in the city. And there are modeled plushies, posters, and other stuff off this streamer. You could easily take that stuff and plop it down here. Maybe get some stuff like a rug, some cafe chairs, stuff that makes it look like it'd be an actual hideaway that someone would find comfortable, especially since, again, this is a frickin' sewer! And you can do small things like this too to add personality to locations. Hell, if I'm being honest, if you look towards the accessible rooms in the game, they're pretty well detailed and look really good. Heck, go into one of the restaurants, you can see a lot of details and assets made specifically for this place. Why couldn't they do this with the cafes? Why not do this with the academy where they have in the city? Hell, just take some assets from Scarlet and Violet and touch it up. When you look at the times when you enter the buildings, they tend to be a lot more memorable parts of the game. Maybe some more dungeon-like buildings will be good. And it's not like Pokemon hasn't done this before. All the way back in Gen 1, we had the Rocket Hideout, and we already have Lysander Labs in this game, so why not add more underground dungeons and buildings you have to scale up to get to the top floor? Now, with the battle system you have going on here, you would have to consider spacing with this, so you'd have to have big enough rooms and corridors so that way the player can maneuver and battle in without getting clipped on something. I don't think that's too much of a problem since we can battle just fine in Lysander Labs in the sewers, so I think there should be other buildings you can enter and explore. And with the introduction of the DLC, the Mega Dimension could have done a lot more with this. We got a forest, 2 caves with water and magma to them, and a pseudo sky pillar. Why not make these into full-on dungeons that players can explore, especially after you're done fighting the bosses in them? After all, Pokemon back in the day were found in fields, caves, forests, and ancient ruins, and while I understand we're stuck in a city, you can't expect your players not to complain about these when you introduce other locations and alternate dimensions. Hell, it's because it's alternate dimensions you could literally get away with pretty much anything for a location here. And I know we're just talking about interiors, but I'm just saying this is something to consider. I'm someone who's been in the world of Pokemon for years, playing the games, critiquing the games, pulling my hair out of the discussion online, and haven't seen a lot of the criticism and online slap fights over the series. I will say the games are far from perfect. And while I don't agree with every criticism levied at these games, including the ones that are outright dishonest, there is legitimate criticism for the Pokemon games, especially in the Switch era. Pokemon Legends ZA can be a fun game, but it has a lot of things that make it hard for me to really recommend to people, and part of that is the price tag and how the game looks. I've always been a guy who talks about how graphics in games aren't the be-all, end-all, and someone who doesn't really believe that more realism equates to a better looking product. I play retro games all the time, and they're fun, and can be entertaining to look at. Just so long as they're not DMC2. Frickin' chopper. But don't take that to mean that I think Legends ZA is perfect. I just got done with a ton of the points that can make the game look a lot better without completely overhauling the game's graphics. But now I want to ask what you guys think. Do you like this kind of video? And I hope you all enjoyed it, because until next time, my friends, I'm MangaKamen. Later. Hey, major thanks to my supporters on Patreon, Ko-Fi, and channel members. These amazing people like Bloody Eclipse, Red Jester, Emily Infinite, Raven Gutiana, Odd Emerald Zone, Atheon, Saki Eclipse, Miles Vega, Mike Soul, and Shadow Pain. Thanks again for supporting me. Your contributions help me and my editors continue to make amazing content for you all to enjoy. And if you want to see your name amongst these great people, check things out down below in the description to find out how. And hey, if you liked the video, be sure to leave a like, a comment, and if you're on mobile, use the hype feature to help push the video more into the algorithm. This stuff helps out well, and most of it is free. And if you reach this part of the video, YouTube thinks you'd like to see these videos, so be sure to check them out. MangaKamen out.